This is the quickest we've ever gotten silent for one of these meetings before, so I think we'll begin. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Eggers, and I'm in Cedar, the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research in the Office of Strategic Programs. I'd like to welcome you to today's meeting on female sexual dysfunction, particularly related to interest and arousal, as part of our agency's patient-focused drug development initiative. Thank you. Give me 1 second. All right, I can do this on my own without any notes. We have a very full day today and tomorrow, and we have a lot of work to do on all of our parts. So I'm going to soon turn it over to Dr. Audrey Gassman, who will give a proper welcome. But before we do, I want to go over a few agenda items and other details. Oh, there we go. Okay. We're going to start with FDA doing some talking first to set the context by giving an overview of our patient-focused drug development initiative, giving some background on female sexual dysfunction and its therapeutic options, and then I'll come back and give an overview of the discussion format. I will be serving as the facilitator today. Our two primary topics are, number one, the disease symptoms and daily impacts that matter most to patients. What is it about their condition that bothers them the most, that bothers you the most? And then topic two, what are your perspectives on current approaches to treating female sexual dysfunction, particularly as it relates to interest and arousal? Those are our two main discussion topics today, where we'll engage patients and patient representatives in the audience participating here today and on the web. And then, as we do for all of our patient-focused drug development meetings, we have a half hour for an open public comment at the end of the meeting, which will give anyone a chance to make a comment, even if it's not quite related to the topics at hand. I believe the registration for that has been, we have filled the capacity for that open public comment, and Pujita will be giving you more information then. And then at the end, we'll wrap up and do closing remarks for today, and then tomorrow is our more scientific discussion on specific issues related to drug development and evaluation for FSD, particularly interest and arousal. There are a few housekeeping issues. The restrooms are located about as far away as you can go at the end of the hall that way. There's a kiosk that has basic food, and we encourage you to get up as you need. This is not a formal meeting setting, so if you need to get up and use the restrooms, please do. Please silence your phones. We will be recording the transcript of this meeting. We also are on the webcast, so a shout out to those of you on the webcast. We understand there's a very healthy participation registration for the webcast. It is great to see so much interest in this meeting. So our webcast will be live right now, and it will also be archived on our website. We also understand that there are media outlets present. If you probably noticed them on your way in, and we are happy to see the level of excitement and interest in this meeting. We just want to make you aware that their presence is in no way affiliated with FDA. And your participation or your not participation in any kind of, if they ask you to participate in an interview, is completely at your discretion. Okay. With that, I'm going to turn it to Audrey, who will give some welcome remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's meeting on female sexual dysfunction patient-focused drug development. I'm Audrey Gassman, Deputy Director of the Division of Bone, Reproductive, and Urologic Products, also known as DBROP, in the Office of New Drugs at the FDA. This is an important meeting, and we're looking forward to hearing from women who experience sexual dysfunction and what they look for in treatments for this condition. We're pleased to see so many patients and advocates in the audience, and I understand that there are many others joining remotely from the web. Thank you again for being here and being part of this meeting. Today's meeting is one in a series of what is called FDA's Patient-Focused Drug Development Meetings. Teresa Mullen will describe this initiative in more detail in a few minutes. Female sexual dysfunction is a complex and multifaceted disorder that affects women across a wide spectrum of symptoms and severity. Our meeting over the next 2 days will focus on the most common form, female sexual interest and arousal disorder, also known as FSIAD. Later, Christina Chang, our lead medical team leader, will provide some brief background on FSIAD. I just want to say that we recognize that this is a condition that can greatly impact the quality of life. The FDA is committed to supporting the development of drug therapies for FSD. When we discuss drug development over the next 2 days, we are referring to the process of identifying, developing, and evaluating potential therapies that can help patients manage their FSD. FDA's mission is to protect and promote public health by evaluating the safety and efficacy of new drugs. While we play a critical role in drug development, we are just one part of the process. We do not develop drugs or conduct clinical trials. Drug companies, often working with researchers or patient communities, are the ones who will conduct the trials and submit applications for new drugs at the FDA. We work closely with the drug companies throughout the drug development process. We are therefore glad to see representation and tremendous interest in today's meeting from industry, academia, and other government partners in the room and on the web. I want to spend a few minutes providing a bit of background on the FDA's important role in drug evaluation. For a drug to be approved for marketing, FDA must determine that it is safe and effective for its intended use. Our regulatory decisions are based on science, medicine, as well as legal and regulatory standards. First and foremost, the drug must demonstrate substantial evidence of efficacy for its intended use. This is a requirement by law. Although the meaning of safe is not explicitly defined in the statutes or regulations, the safety of a drug is assessed by determining whether the benefits outweigh the risks. The FDA makes each determination for a new drug based on the totality of information provided by drug companies in their new drug application, whether it is a request, which is a request for marketing authorization in the U.S. FDA's benefit risk assessment takes into account many factors, including the presence of alternative therapies for the indication, the goals of the proposed therapy, the magnitude of the demonstrated benefit, and the nature of the risks associated with the new product. We take our roles very seriously. We are aware of claims from external sources that the FDA favors therapies in regard to men when it comes to indications related to sexual dysfunction or sexual difficulties. As a representative of the division and of the FDA, I want to assure you that we are willing and ready to work with all sponsors and investigators to address these conditions, whether they are in men, women, or both. We evaluate all applications individually based on submitted evidence and do not apply different standards or regulatory standards when making our decisions. Drug development for female sexual dysfunction is very complicated due to many factors, such as the ability to diagnose the dysfunction, the presence of underlying medical conditions that may be responsible for the dysfunction, challenges identifying outcomes that are both meaningful to patients and are measurable, and challenges designing trials that can reliably assess drug efficacy and safety. FDA wants to help facilitate this complicated process. For example, we advise all sponsors who intend to treat symptom-related conditions, including female sexual dysfunction, to consider our 2009 guidance on development of patient-reported outcomes, which provides recommendations for development. There are still many scientific issues that need to be resolved in this field. Tomorrow we will have a discussion that will be more technical in nature, exploring important aspects of drug development process for FSD. We will cover topics that include diagnostic criteria, clinical trial design, and outcome measures. Today's meeting, however, is about listening to patients. We think very carefully about the kinds of things we should be measuring and evaluating for a new drug for FSD, and hearing your perspectives on this will be invaluable. Specifically, we would like to hear from patients what symptoms matter most and how they affect daily life and sexual experiences. We are also interested in understanding what patients are currently doing to help themselves to treat this condition. What we hear from you today can help us understand what patients would value in treatments for FSD. Your input can help us understand how to develop better endpoints to measure the aspects of FSD that are important to patients and to develop better tools such as patient-reported outcomes, or PROs. Sarah Eggers will explain our meeting format process, which is designed to encourage a rich discussion today. I want to reiterate one point. The important issues that I have mentioned are common to the development and evaluation for any drug to treat female sexual dysfunction. Therefore, our goal today, and tomorrow for that matter, is to explore these issues broadly and not focus attention on any one specific drug or therapy. Thank you again for your participation and for being here today. I'll now turn it over to Teresa Mullen, who will provide some background on FDA's overall patient-focused drug development efforts.
Hi, I'm Teresa Mullen, and I direct the Office of Strategic Programs in the Center for Drugs. And I just want to take a minute to give you the background on this meeting, and it is one way we look at this is one of a series of meetings that we're, I'll say, piloting this approach to do a better job of more systematically trying to collect information from patients about their perspective on their condition and the treatments available, as Andrea mentioned. We understand that the patient's perspective is quite critical to our understanding and thus our ability to assess the benefits and risks of any new therapy. Patients are the ones who experience the disease. They're the ones who will get any benefit that can be gotten from a new drug and also be the ones to experience the risks. And so their role is quite critical and unique in terms of informing our decision making. And before this initiative began in 2012, we didn't really have a way to systematically collect this kind of information. We had a patient representative program that allowed us to involve 1 or 2 patients in our process. And of course, because they would be involved in the discussion of particular drugs, we had to go through a lot of conflict of interest screening, and we still have this program, and it's very valuable, but as you can hear, it limits our ability to get wider input, and we knew we really needed to hear from as diverse and broad a community as possible who was affected by any given disease. So we designed this program and included it in our reauthorized prescription drug user fee commitments that we made in 2012. And so we have committed in that program to include at least 20 meetings in different disease areas over the 5 years to sort of, as I said, pilot this approach and figure out how we can optimize it to get the most benefit both in the meeting and then in our follow-up to these meetings. This helps us better understand and advise sponsors during the drug development process, and also, of course, gives us some more insight than we would have had in reviewing any particular application that gets submitted. So, all right. Just a minute, I need to find the advance key. Okay. Did I go twice? I'm sorry, my slides look so much alike that, oh, there we go. So this process just quickly started in 2012. We published a Federal Register notice, which is our usual way of communicating to the public, with about 40 diseases in it. We asked for comment. We got about 4,500 comments on that list, and that helped us to sort of sort through. We came up with a list of 16 that we're focusing on the first 3 years. And then in this slide, as you see, there's a Federal Register notice there. On October the 8th, we published a list of diseases that we're offering as candidates for the final 2 years of the program, 2016 and 17, and we're hoping to receive public comment by, I think, December the 5th on what we'll set up there. And this slide shows you the diseases that we're covering in those first 3 years. The ones on the left for fiscal year 13 and 14 are ones we've already done at this point, and we're working our way through producing our reports and following up on those. And today's meeting is on female sexual dysfunction. It's the first meeting we're having in 2015 on our for this fiscal year. And so, as Andrea said, each of our meetings covers 2 essential areas, which is what are the patient's experience with the disease? What are the most problematic aspects of it? What are they doing to treat it today? There may not be any good treatments available, but what are they doing to try to cope with the condition? We start with those questions and we tailor it further. The review division may have other things they want to take advantage of having you here today to hear about other things as well. So for example, we had a meeting on HIV/AIDS. We took that opportunity to talk to the patients about their perspective on cure research. Would they be willing to forego the treatments that were available to participate in a trial that involved cure therapy? And so there are things we can talk to the patients or hear from them about that provide a unique opportunity. We try to put those into these meetings as well if we can. And then we take what we learn here. What we have found is the more active participation, the more we get to hear from what you think, and the more patients who are able to participate here in the room or on the webcast or through the docket, the more we benefit and the more of a rich source of information this gives us. So we're very happy, gratified to have so many people here today. And so the final slide I have here is the report that we produce at the end of this, which is sort of our first deliverable, our first product of these meetings, is called the Voice of the Patient. So following each of these meetings, we try to take the transcript and the other information, our notes, and write up the summary of what we heard and try to capture it in the words that you use to tell us what you're experiencing, because those are really the most authentic way we can record this and try to convey to the reviewers today or beyond this what we heard and what you're experiencing. We take that report and use it as a way to communicate in the future to our staff, to have it as a reference document, and also to inform our subsequent efforts that we may try to segue from this into patient-reported outcome tools and other ways to follow up longer term to get the full benefit of this for future drug development and our decision making. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Mullen. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the patient-focused drug development meeting on female sexual interest arousal disorder here at FDA. My name is Christina Cheng. I am a clinical team leader in the Division of Bone, Reproductive, and Neurologic Products here in Cedar. And my division reviews the drugs that are intended to treat female sexual dysfunction, or FSD for short. My team is specifically responsible for reviewing any clinical data that are submitted in support of these applications. We appreciate so many of you being here, participating in this workshop here on campus, and also for those who are joining us via the web. And we are very grateful to those patients who are willing to share their personal stories on a very, very sensitive topic. So again, very welcome. And given the limited time that we have and the complexity of the female sexual dysfunction overall, we would like to focus today's workshop primarily on FSIAD, or female sexual interest arousal disorder. The reason for today's meeting is that although sexual dysfunction is not a life-threatening condition, we do realize and recognize that the dysfunction can significantly impact a woman's quality of life, and its effects can definitely result in major disturbances in family life. These service studies have suggested that women more than men have complained about having sexual difficulties, and that these problems appear to be very common in U.S. women. In this frequently cited 1995 study, women between the ages of 18 and 59 reported complaints to the investigators, and these complaints include lack of sexual desire, difficulty in becoming aroused, inability to achieve orgasm, anxiety about sexual performance, reaching orgasm too rapidly, pain during sexual intercourse, or failure to derive pleasure from sex. The 43% figure emerged from an analysis of responses from more than 1,700 women. Some critics have pointed out that the women in this study were not specifically asked about whether their complaints were severe enough to bother them. And subsequently, a lot of discussions ensued on how we should define what exactly constitutes female sexual dysfunction. But it is not possible to talk about dysfunction without first discussing normal sexual function. Normal sexual response in women depends on a very complex web of interacting factors, including physiological, emotional, relationship dynamics, and much, much more. Significant changes in any of these components can affect a woman's sexual desire, response, and satisfaction. Although the definition of sexual dysfunction in women has been the subject of some debate because it appears to be less quantifiable, what has not been disputed is that for a woman to be diagnosed with a dysfunction, her symptoms must be severe enough to be a source of personal distress. And as this 2008 study by Dr. Shiffrin shows, that an estimated 12% of U.S. adult women may have sexual problems when their diagnosis takes into account the presence of personal distress. So we went from 43% to 12%, but this is obviously still a significant segment of the female population in this country. I want to move on now to a brief overview of the female sexual dysfunction as defined by the American Psychiatric Association. FSD is a term that covers a heterogeneous collection of conditions, and in the past, FSD was classified into 4 different conditions. The first, hypoactive sexual desire disorder, characterized by the absent or reduced interest in sexual activity, as well as not being receptive to a partner's initiation of sexual activity. Second, female sexual arousal disorder, characterized by the inability to attain or maintain sexual excitement. Third, orgasmic disorder, characterized by the difficulty to attain orgasm despite sufficient arousal. And the last being pain disorder, where women complain of pain during sexual intercourse. And in May of last year, hypoactive sexual desire disorder, or HSDD, and female sexual arousal disorder, or FSAD, were combined into a single diagnosis in the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. The other disorders remain relatively unchanged. With FSIAD being a relatively new diagnosis, we know that there has been limited clinical experience, and consequently we're hoping very much to hear your thoughts on this new diagnosis. As outlined in the DSM-5, here are the features that are used to arrive at a diagnosis of FSIAD. There are 6 symptoms that I have taken verbatim from the diagnostic manual, and as you can see, the first 3, as well as the 5th symptom, relate to the absent or reduced sexual desire. The final 3 symptoms have to do with the absent or reduced arousal. The manual specifies that to qualify for the diagnosis, the patient must have had at least 3 of these symptoms for at least 6 months in duration. And specifically for 2 of the symptoms, namely number 4 and number 6, the manual also mandates documenting the frequency when the patients would notice these symptoms. So the patients should report these 2 symptoms, number 4 and number 6, occurring in at least 75% of the sexual encounters. Furthermore, the symptoms in the previous slide must cause significant distress to the patient. However, what clinically significant distress means exactly is not really defined in the manual. And most importantly, 3 other contributors to sexual dysfunction must be ruled out before making the diagnosis. First, the problem with having either low desire or low arousal cannot be explained by another psychiatric disorder such as depression or anxiety. Second, any relationship factors should be considered before making a diagnosis. But here again, the manual does not elaborate on what these relationship stressors may be or how severe they have to be. It seems that there are many other stressors besides partner violence, such as kids, work, other relationship dynamics, etc. So we would like to hear your perspective. And finally, the third factor that needs to be considered is medical illnesses, medications, or any other substance use. So FSIAD is really almost a diagnosis of exclusion. Additionally, the manual outlines other ways to describe FSIAD, such as using a severity grading, classified as mild, moderate, or severe. Another way of categorizing the condition is whether the patient has always had the condition, or it's something new in her sexual experience. The third classification would be whether the condition is situational, such that it only happens in specific environments with a particular partner, or whether the condition is generalized, meaning that there are no identifiable triggers. And as we all know, there are no drugs approved by FDA to specifically treat FSIAD, HSDD, or FSAD. Some existing products have been studied for these conditions, but these products have had their own issues. For example, sildenafil or Viagra was studied for the treatment of female sexual arousal dysfunction or disorder, but was not shown to be effective. Other products, such as hormonal therapies, may have potential safety issues when they're taken long term. Non-drug therapies, include behavioral therapies or couple sex therapy, but we're not aware of any large-scale studies to support these treatments. So we're very interested in hearing from the patients as to what remedies you've been using to help with your sexual problems and whether you feel that they've helped or not. I also want to point out that for pain associated with sex or the sexual pain disorder, FDA has actually approved several products. In addition to several estrogen-containing products, we've recently approved ospemifene for the treatment of pain during intercourse that is associated with vulvar or vaginal changes due to menopause. So part of the rationale for convening this meeting today is our recognition that we do not yet have drug therapies to help women with either low sexual desire or low arousal. And as I mentioned already, when it comes to HSDD, FSAD, or FSIAD, making the diagnosis correctly is complicated. Accordingly, developing drugs to treat these conditions is also very complicated. And this workshop presents an opportunity that going forward, the FDA, industry, and the larger community could be hopefully on the same page with respect to the terminologies relating to these conditions and identifying the appropriate patients who truly have dysfunction in desire or arousal can help us move forward in developing safe and effective drug therapies for those who can really benefit. From the discussion today, we'd also like to get a better sense from the patients on what are the most important symptoms we should measure in clinical trials to see if a drug conveys a benefit. And how should we measure these changes? These are very important parameters in assessing whether a drug works for its intended purpose. In order to help identify meaningful endpoints for clinical trials, the FDA is very interested in patient-reported outcomes. Patient-reported outcomes, or PROs, can represent direct measures of treatment benefit in identifying how a patient feels or how a patient functions. For conditions like FSIAD, HSDD, or FSAD, where a diagnosis is based on a more qualitative than quantitative assessment, input from the patients is really essential. And we very much would like to see well-defined and reliable PRO instruments developed, validated, and evaluated in clinical trials for drug development. I will just put in a plug for tomorrow's program. We are also having a scientific workshop tomorrow to discuss some of the very challenging issues in developing drug therapies for these conditions, and we hope that many of you will be able to join us tomorrow. Thank you all again for being here, and now let me turn it over to Dr. Sarah Eggers.
Thank you very much to all of the FDA colleagues for providing that background. We got one more FDA speaker that stands in the way of the discussion with you, so I'll try to make this as brief as possible. This meeting today is quite different in format and style from other public meetings you may have attended. And as Audrey mentioned, that's the goal, that's our intent, is to have a format that really encourages and enables dialogue with patients. The two topics that we're covering, we've mentioned this before, but I'll go into a bit more detail now. One, the symptoms that matter most to you, and in particular, symptoms that or aspects of your condition that have the most significant impact on your sexual experience, specifically and more broadly on your daily life. And how specifically do these symptoms affect your sexual experiences? And how, if at all, do they change over time? And then after the break, we'll come back and talk about the approaches to treating FSIAD. What are you currently doing to treat your condition and its symptoms? How well do they work for you? What are their biggest downsides? And importantly, what would you look for in an ideal treatment? What specific things would you like, aspects of your condition, would you like to see addressed? As far as our format for each of those two topics, we're first going to ask a panel of patients to share their stories with us and provide a good foundation for a facilitated discussion that will follow. And those of you who are on topic 1, if you could please come to the front make your way to the front at this time. Bring your name tags. If you don't have a tent card, I probably have it up here for you. Okay. These panel members were identified from those when we put out the invitation in the Federal Register notice. We invited people to submit comments if they were interested in presenting comments to start our discussion, and we identified a range of women who experience a range of symptoms and reflect a range of perspectives to attend. So I thank you in advance for coming up here. After they have their comments, there may be some clarifying questions, but then we're going to move out into the facilitated discussion, really follow up and build on what we heard from the panel discussants and ask more detailed questions for that. And the purpose here is to build on what we heard from the panel and really get a sense of what's more in depth and what range of perspectives and experiences are out there. So we have staff floating around. You don't have to go up to any microphones. We have staff floating around who will bring the mic to you. So when I ask a question, just raise your hand, and we're going to try to take everyone who wants to speak. I have some ground rules that we'll go over in a minute. We're going to ask that you please state your first name. We don't need your last name, just your first name is fine before speaking. And for the sake of transparency, we also request that at the time that you first speak, and that includes the panel discussants as well, that you disclose if you are affiliated with an organization that has an interest in FSD, or if your travel has been sponsored, or if you have significant financial interests in FSD drug development. That's in the sake of transparency, and we'll just ask everyone to disclose that at the first time that they speak. And when we ask a question, try to keep your responses focused on the specific question or topic at hand. You should have a chance to speak on any topics as they come up, so that will really help the conversation move forward. And please try to keep those responses limited to a minute or two. I'm going to regularly ask through a show of hands if you in the audience and the webcast can chime in as well, if you generally share a particular view that was just experienced, so we can really build on what one another is saying. Okay. Okay. So we also have the web, as I said, a strong web participation, and this is really important. We want to hear from the women on the web today as well. Although we may not read or summarize all of your comments today, they are being reviewed. They will be part of the public record, and we are incorporating them into our final reports. We're also going to occasionally go to the phones to give you on the web another opportunity to contribute as time permits. All of you will have a chance to answer polling questions, and I'm going to ask for the polling questions. We'll put them on the table, please. There's little clickers. Okay, so there's going to be some clickers floating around, And we're going to ask that just women who identify themselves as having FSD and in particular interest in arousal to take the clicker and to answer the questions. This is not at all a scientific survey. It's merely a discussion aid. It helps us understand who's in the room and what perspectives you might share and what your experiences might be. So please don't treat this in any way as a scientific exercise. But we do find that it really does enable a discussion. We can build on things that we hear from the polling. Okay. We also, importantly, have a public docket. We know that there are many, many issues that you won't be able to talk about today, and many things that you wish you could talk about in more detail. And you all have the opportunity, and anyone in the audience, anyone participating in the meeting, whether you're a patient representative or not, to contribute a comment, follow up on what you have said at the meeting, or a comment that just provides your full story. And if you have people who weren't able to attend the meeting today, we encourage them as well to share their stories with us and your experiences. On our website, you can see the information for the public docket. A docket is just it's an unfortunate word for a repository that it's a place, a vehicle for us to get comments from the public. So it's just a website you're sending your comment to. When you go to regulations.gov, if you follow our web link, you will get to a link and just click on the Comment Now button. Okay. There are other resources for you. So the FDA's Office of Health and Constituent Affairs really focuses on providing patients with information that they need, and they're the ones, as Teresa mentioned, run the patient representative program. So if you have any questions or you would like to follow up with them, their information is here. And also CEDAR now has a new Office of Professional Affairs and Stakeholder Engagement. And we have Rhea Blakely is around. She's right there in the back, has her hand raised. Particularly if you are an organization or a healthcare provider or others who wants to engage with FDA, you may feel free to reach out to Rhea. Our primary goal today is to enable a fair and open discussion. To ensure that, I'd like to go over a few participation ground rules. We are here first and foremost to listen to women who experience female sexual dysfunction, particularly as it relates to interest and arousal. So we encourage all participants with FSID to contribute to the dialogue. Your partners and advocates are welcome too, but we ask that you focus your participation on helping further understand women's experiences and perspectives with respect to the questions posed. We are going to try to accommodate everyone who wants to speak. And if we don't get your full comments, please go to the docket. For the advocate organizations and the many, many healthcare providers that have registered today, we encourage you to listen to the dialogue today and submit a comment to the docket that expresses your understanding as to the degree to which the input that we hear today reflects your understanding of the women that you work with, reflects their perspectives and experiences, because we do want to make sure that we reflect the broad range of experiences that are out there and perspectives that are out there. We're happy to see participants today who represent research, industry, and other organizations. We do believe that this input is important for you as well, and we just ask you to stay in listening mode today. FDA staff is here to listen and to take notes and to help ask follow-up questions as the day goes forward. We won't be able to address any questions from the audience today that might arise. The purpose of tomorrow's meeting is to discuss these issues, regulatory and drug development issues, in more depth. So if you have a question and you're able to participate tomorrow, I recommend that you hold it, see if it gets answered there, and there's Q&A sessions and there's opportunities to ask those questions. And if at the end of that time you still haven't heard the answers that you're looking for, please, the contact information for RIA and for the Office of Health and Constituent Affairs, or there are evaluation forms at the end of today's meeting that we're going to ask you to fill out. Feel free to write your questions and we will try to address them in some way, either directly or indirectly. As we've described today, our discussion is focused on symptoms first and foremost, and on experiences with treatment approaches. We understand that there are other important issues, many other important issues, to ensuring that the women with FSD get treatment and support that they need. Our narrow focus today reflects FDA's need for specific information, as both Audrey and Christina mentioned. There are a few things that our discussion will not focus on today, and that includes specific issues with any particular product or any particular drug under evaluation. We are also not addressing the broader question about whether there is or is not a need for medical treatments for FSD. As Dr. Gassman stated, FDA is committing to supporting the development of drug therapies for FSD. And our discussion may touch upon specific treatments, and this is appropriate. We do want to ask about treatments. However, the discussion of those treatments, we hope, is done in a way that helps us understand those broader issues. What symptoms are generally being addressed? How do you know that that treatment is working? We don't really necessarily care what treatment it is. What's useful to us is to say, well, how does a woman know when a treatment's working? What specific things is it addressing, and how meaningful is that to you as patients? The opinions expressed here today are personal opinions. This discussion is going to touch on very sensitive topics. I don't even need to say that. We all know that this is a very, very personal experience, that all women are facing sexual experience. Everyone faces these as very personal experiences. And we want the women up here to feel comfortable expressing talking about their experiences and expressing their perspectives. Therefore, demonstrating respect is of paramount importance. We expect everyone here to be on that same page in terms of respect. Please wait to be acknowledged before speaking and then speak into the microphone. And please do not direct your comments to or about any specific individual, and avoid negative language. And please keep side conversations to a minimum. Okay, got that over with. Now let's move on. We want your feedback to the meeting. We really do appreciate the evaluations that we get, and we do review them carefully. We have several meetings moving forward, and what we learn from each of these meetings really helps us with the next. So with that, does everyone have a clicker who wants a clicker? We have a few of the polling questions, and these just, again, give us a sense of who's in the room and who's on the web and at this point. So we start with an easy one, and this will help others as well. So where do you live? Where are you coming from? A, if you're inside the Washington, D.C. metro area, and B, if you're from outside. Okay. As we expected, this is an issue that has a very wide geographic representation here today. So we thank you all, whether you traverse the Beltway every day, so this is something you routinely do, or if this is one of the rare occasions when you have to do so. Okay. Are you participating today because you personally are significantly bothered by A, absent or reduced desire for interest in sexual activity or sexual fantasies? B, absent or reduced sexual excitement, sexual pleasure, or sexual arousal during sexual activity? C, both? D, neither, but you have some other symptom associated with FSD. And if none of these apply, just don't answer the question. We'll give some time to. Okay. Okay. So a lot of you here are battling with both of these. We will delve into these, try to tease them apart a bit. And for those of you that feel only one or the other, we will try to get your experiences on how you experienced the one but not the other, and how those experiences are for you. Okay. What is your age? We have the range of ages represented here. It's really wonderful to see so many people who are younger than 30 here participating today, as well as the entire range. This differing of the age range indicates that you might have experiences that are very different depending on whether you have or have not gone through menopause. Can I back up a minute? I neglected to ask about the web polling results for the previous question about what their interest is in this meeting.
Yes, we have about 55% of the people online voted for absent or reduced desire or interest in sexual activity or sexual fantasies. And for question 3, we have, for the age, we have about a third of the people between the ages of 31 to 40, and about 30% of the people between 51 and 60.
Okay, thank you. Have you received a diagnosis of female sexual interest or arousal disorder, FSIAD, hypoactive sexual desire disorder, HSDD, or female sexual arousal disorder, FSAD, from a healthcare provider? Okay, so it looks like we have a mix of both. Okay, from here on, I get tongue-tied very easily, so I am going to just say FSD from now on, and by that we mean FSD with particular focus on interest and arousal, but if I have to say either the acronyms or the words out, we could be here till tomorrow. How long have you had symptoms of FSD? Less than 5 years, 5 to 10, 10 to 20, more than 20, or you're not sure? This is also a very nice mix of experiences that we have here. We're going to try to tease apart some of that a little bit as we go on. And on the web?
50% of the people on the web said that they have had symptoms from 5 to 10 years.
Okay. All right, that's it for our polling questions for tonight. We have a few more as the 2 discussion topics unfold, but thank you very much for answering those. It's time to move into the topic 1 discussion. And again, this is on, in everyone, you have the agenda and the questions that we posed in our Federal Register notice that were the focus of today's discussion are printed on the last page or the back of that agenda. This is very much just a summary of those to fit on one slide, but we've gone over what the main point of this discussion is. A few other things we want to know is about if your symptoms wax and wane over time. We have a few questions about if you're asked to rate your symptoms, we have some considerations that we'd like to get from you. And then finally we'll talk about what worries you about that distress portion as we get into the facilitated discussion. But to kick it off, we are going to have each of the 4 of you go. I know you all by phone, by name, but they should have printed your names on the other sides of the... You can start. Oh, and when you... Nope, just...
Okay. Hello? Okay. My name is Vicki, and I have to say at first, Veritas is taking care of my travel expenses through grants from Sprout Pharmaceuticals, Even the Score, and the Institute for Sexual Medicine. So, starting off, I'm 39 years old. I'm here to tell my story about my experience living with HSDD. My symptoms became significantly noticeable about 5 years ago after the birth of my 4th child. A couple years before that, I had experienced a slight decrease in desire and fewer sexual occurrences, but I figured it was just because we were both busier in our lives. I realized that there was something more going on with me when I started to just not want to have sex at all. I stopped initiating sex, and my desire became non-existent. This was not normal for me. My husband and I had a very fulfilling and healthy sex life up until this point. Our friends would even make comments about how we couldn't keep our hands off each other. I sought out answers from different specialists to find out what was happening to me and if there was something I could do. I had an array of tests done spanning from full panel blood work to hormone testing to even internal ultrasounds. No one had any answers for me when all of my tests came back normal, but I knew there had to be something else going on. My mom told me I should go to San Diego to see Dr. Goldstein because she was a patient of his and he may have answers for me. I was reluctant at first because I had already spent so much money on testing and my insurance would not cover any tests that had to do with hormones. My mom felt it was so important for me to see him that she flew me to San Diego and he diagnosed me with HSDD. My symptoms rapidly worsened over the last 3 years. I found myself avoiding any situations where a sexual experience may occur. For example, going to bed after my husband fell asleep or jumping out of bed in the morning before he got up, just so he wouldn't try to initiate sex. I even found myself avoiding simple hugs and kisses. The defining moment for me was when my husband and I took a vacation for a week to Mexico without kids. This was supposed to be a time for the two of us to relax and enjoy each other. In the past, when we had taken vacations together, we barely left the room. My mom always joked, quote, "Don't get pregnant," when we left. But unfortunately, my symptoms stayed the same. In a beautiful place with the man I loved, my body was like a shell with nothing inside. I just did not feel like I wanted to have sex. My desire was still gone. This was devastating to both of us and definitely put a strain on the trip. My sexual experiences recently are more out of obligation to keep my husband satisfied. After all, it is not his fault this is happening to me. I feel it is important to say that my husband and I talk very openly about HSDD. I know he loves me very much and tries hard to understand. He does not have any problems as far as his sexual function or desire, so it is difficult for him to relate. I would like to note that if he did have a problem with sexual dysfunction as a man, he would have many options for treatment. But that being said, it has put a big strain on our relationship, and he has said to me that he feels stupid at times, and he keeps getting shut down. I know he feels rejected. This is the last thing I want the man I love to feel. It makes me feel so guilty and frustrated. I can't be the woman he married. So I think to myself, I'm only 39 years old. Am I just going to be like this forever? What does it mean for my future and the future of my marriage? Is there no hope for me to get back the feelings I had before? Women like me who feel this way need a solution. We deserve to feel our sexual desire again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria.
Good afternoon. My name is Beverly, and Veritas arranged my travel here today, but I do have to tell you I would be here regardless. I'm quite passionate about the subject, so I appreciate the opportunity that the FDA has given me to come here today and talk to you and tell you my story. Can you hear me now? All right. I'm hoping that hearing my personal story about how I've suffered with this medical condition will help you understand why women need help. I started out having this issue about 4 years ago. Initially, I thought it was just going to be something that passed quickly. It started because I had an allergic reaction to a medication. Then my whole life changed, basically turned upside down. I saw over 30 doctors in a variety of specialties before I found treatment. I'm about $35,000 into this issue at this point. I started with my personal gynecologist, moved on to my general practitioner, my concierge doctor, saw specialists at major teaching and research hospitals, sought out the help of top urogynecologists, endocrinologists, and other specialties. I wasn't getting any help, but I wasn't going to stop. I endured dental nerve injections because they might work. I was given antidepressants, which ironically make it even more impossible for you to orgasm. Anybody who didn't know that? Muscle relaxers, painkillers, I have a drawer full. Then I had life-threatening things like face swelling, rapid heartbeat, major weight loss. No one could find the root of my problem, but I kept getting prescriptions for things that didn't help. In case you're unfamiliar with the condition, I'll share some of the things that I experienced as symptoms. They include, not limited to, but pain, depression, inability to maintain relationships, loss of interest, loss of ability to get aroused, low self-confidence, inability to achieve orgasm, inability to maintain relationships with your friends, your family. It really impacts your self-esteem, and you have to be an advocate for yourself because there's really no help out there. I run a small business. I'm an entrepreneur. I have to get up every day and go out and interact with people at high levels in the community. I almost lost the ability to do that. I adopted a daughter from Russia when she was 9 years old. When this hit, she was about 15 years old and needed me most. I lost at least 3 years with her, and I'll never regain that time. I think the thing that makes me most angry and most disappointed is that if I went to my doctor and I was a man and I said these things, they would be able to write me a prescription within a couple of minutes for a drug that is insurance covered and FDA approved. I don't know how all their drugs got through approval, but I'd like to know who's behind that. I probably spent 50 hours in manual pelvic floor physical therapy thinking that might be the problem. And yes, that is just as personal and intrusive as it sounds. Fortunately for me, I didn't believe all those other doctors, and I didn't take all of those other drugs for any period of time, particularly when I had life-affecting, threatening side effects like face swelling. I found Dr. Goldstein, and I received some treatment from him. He had the answers. He did different blood panels. He did some other testing. I even talked to a sex therapist in his practice who confirmed that this was not in my head, but a physiological issue and medical condition. Prior to the onset of this, I had a very robust and fulfilling sex life. Now that I'm being treated, I don't have issues with arousal, interest, or orgasm. All of those things are possible. I have a great and supportive significant other. Unfortunately, I lost a major relationship to this issue, and I never want to go back there. The topic is never far from my mind. I'll never forget how it impacts my life, and I know it could come back at any time. My significant other is very aware of how my systems wax and wane. He knows when my treatment is due. It's very evident in how I initiate, or how interested I am, or how aroused I get. I can tell you for sure there's a direct correlation. Recently, I appealed to my insurance company who declined to pay for any of my treatments. We went to a full third-party medical appeal. Unfortunately, they determined it was not medically necessary and told me that no future appeal would be possible. The biggest thing that scares me is someday I might not be able to afford the treatments I get. And if I were a man, every treatment I've gotten would be covered. In closing, I would just like to express that I was passionate about this and honestly quite angry about it as I started to prepare to come here to tell my story. After I was briefed by Sarah from the FDA about my participation, I honestly was dismayed, and it became fairly profound. She was delightful to speak with when she told me about what to expect here today. Unfortunately, when she told me not to set my expectations too high, as nothing was likely to happen quickly, you can understand that I was very surprised and more than disappointed. I feel strongly that we need this to happen quickly. We need approval. We need doctors to get educated. We need people to understand this is a severe medical condition, and we need women to stop suffering in silence. I know none of you want your mothers or sisters or daughters to go through this. It's an unmet medical need, and no amount of talk therapy is going to fix it. We can't get better from a physiological need by talking about it. I would just be delighted if we had the same choices as men. Thank you for the opportunity to tell my story.
Thank you, Beverly. And then Carol. Beverly, if you could shut off your microphone. Nope.
Okay. Good afternoon. I welcome the opportunity to participate in this meeting and tell my story. By sharing this experience, I hope that it will assist and support women who are currently sexually dysfunctional, as well as those who will experience it in the future. I devoted a significant amount of time, energy in my quest for an answer, a solution, a treatment. I consulted numerous physicians and specialists and experimented with various pills, injections, and topical medications. My symptoms waxed and waned based on the type of medication, its delivery system, dosage, and the period of time I was on it. I experienced brief honeymoon periods when I was sexually functioning 75 to 80%. However, once the effect of the drug began to wear off, I was back to where I started. In my case, there was an active interplay between my physical symptoms and the psychological aspects of my condition. For clarity's sake, I would like to discuss these separately. First and most frustrating symptoms was the loss of my skin sensitivity. The skin numbness felt like my entire body was encased in a rubber glove, sealing off all physical sensation. Another analogy would be having my body injected with a physical numbing agent like lidocaine or Novocaine. The second and related symptom was that I could not have an orgasm. I could not become lubricated, aroused, or sexually excited, even after sexual stimulation. No matter how intensely I tried, I attempted to talk myself into climaxing. I never succeeded. I never succeeded and had no history with this type of condition and never experienced sexual dissatisfaction in the past. I became so frustrated that any attempt to have sexual intercourse would end up with me crying. The onset of both of these symptoms began when I was in my early 50s. It was a very gradual process over a period of months and became progressively more pronounced. It began with small, subtle physical changes. The ability to feel stimulated by being touched slowly disappeared. Sexual arousal and response time kept taking longer and longer until it became non-existent. I had difficulty coping with my new reality, coming to terms with the discrepancy between who I was and who I became. I felt sexually unattractive, inadequate, dysfunctional, isolated, and asexual. My primary concern was that I would never be able to experience sexual pleasure again. After several years, a significant amount of determination, patience, trial and error, and the support of an excellent physician and the correct dosage of medication, my condition finally stabilized. I'm able to climax. However, my skin sensitivity has never been completely restored. Part of getting older is learning to accept the things you cannot change, the courage to change the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol. And finally, we have Karen.
In 1971, at the age of 23, I had to make a careful decision about the type of birth control I would use after the birth of my first and only child. My mother-in-law had had a stroke at age 45 and was paralyzed for the rest of her life. She was in the first wave to use the then revolutionary birth control pill of the 1960s. My doctor recommended the brand new Docket Shield IUD, which was being marketed as the Cadillac of contraception. The advertising brochure I received boasted that it was 100% safe and with no general effects on the body. 12 years later, at the age of 35, my reproductive sexual life and sexual life were forever altered when I had to have a total hysterectomy, including the removal of my ovaries. During my recovery, I learned that the Docket Shield caused the cumulative damage from the pelvic inflammatory disease that went undiagnosed and untreated for 12 years. The Docket Shield debacle went down into history for being a most egregious breach of medical misconduct. The doctor inventor made a number of ethical lapses in the reporting of his research results. Tens of thousands of women suffered a wide range of pelvic damages. I was pleased when I came through the building today to see a display case out front with former defective products, and for all you to see, the Docket Shield IUD, it's out there. At the time, the FDA did not approve devices, and it was precisely because of this case that the FDA began to approve devices as well as drugs. My hysterectomy left me traumatized, in shock, psychically devastated by the loss of my fertility and my precious, highly erotic relationship with my husband. My bodily and psychic symptoms were severe for many years. I had a total loss of sexual desire and arousal. Orgasm was out of the question. As I now know, the loss of the sexual pelvic organs has a profound effect on sexual function. In the 1980s, however, doctors were still claiming that the only loss from a hysterectomy would be the ability to get pregnant. My eventual recovery included retooling my career as a teacher to become a sexuality educator. I hope to educate other women about the sanctity of their sexual organs and how they could make more informed decisions than I did as a young woman. Over time, I was able to regenerate my sexual interest and capacity, although I never fully recovered. At best, I have been able, over time, to have what I call a feeble orgasm. I incorporated what I had learned about positive sexuality and sensuality techniques to enhance my sexual experiences. However, there's always been an ebb and flow. Life stressors presented challenges to my capacities. For me, the loss of a good job, the illnesses and deaths of my parents, etc., added to that ebb and flow in my sex life. Those stresses and the PTSD of the hysterectomy make my symptoms sometimes better and sometimes worse. At present, I'm dealing with the death of my dear husband. This loss has caused another major stressor to my sexuality, a natural consequence of losing the love of my life. The challenge of aging also presents an additional issue to my sexual functioning at this time. At the ripe old age of 67, I turned to my sexuality profession and became the co-founder of what is now the Sexuality and Aging Consortium. Here's a warning. The boomers are coming, literally and figuratively. And we, will demand sexual access in those long-term care facilities that we may enter in a few years. Our society and healthcare community at large are ill-equipped to deal with this phenomenon. So much ignorance pervades our stereotypes of old age. For my part, I accept the reality of my age and past challenges. I do not hold an unrealistic expectation associated with the cultural pressures to be forever young, beautiful, and sexy. I and many other women, young or old, are not ever going to achieve the mind-blowing nirvana of orgasmic ecstasy that saturates our popular culture. I am confident that one day I will return to a satisfying form of sexual expression, whether it be self-love, wink, wink, or partnered coupling. I don't think of myself as a cougar. I'm more of a kitten. You won't hear me roar, but if you listen carefully, you might hear me purr. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. I would like to extend a round of applause to all of the women up here. We know this is very personal to talk about, and we very much appreciate that. Unless my colleagues have any clarifying questions for any of the panelists, okay, I'm going to grab a microphone and make my way to the front.
Sarah, I do have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Two of the panelists, I think it was, let's see, it was Beverly and Carol, both said they are currently being treated. I thought that's what you said. And so if you could say what the treatment is, if it's medication or some other form of therapy, that would be helpful.
Sure, I'm happy to share that. I'm currently being treated with implanted testosterone pellets.
I'm also taking testosterone, but I'm using a localized gel every day.
And we will be addressing those products in a little bit more in topic 2. Any other? Marcia, please.
Yes, I have a question for Beverly. Thank you again for your story. You mentioned that your partner knows when you need treatment. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Certainly, I'm more than happy to expound on it. The issue with arousal and interest is really what's at question here. And we have a very robust sexual life, but when I'm not interested or I'm not initiating or I'm not interested in his advances, it becomes very clear that it's the pellet that's inserted in me is wearing off because we don't have any other stressors in our relationship. There's no issues in our life. And so the only thing that really comes into play is that treatment needs to happen again.
Okay. I'm going to start off by asking for a show of hands. How many of you heard your own experiences reflected in at least one of the panel members' comments today so far? Okay, great, thank you. Anyone who said, my experience is nothing like what any of the women are talking about up here? Okay. At the end, if we haven't addressed your different situations, we'll come back to you. But I think that's reassuring that the range of experiences, we did hear a range of experiences presented this morning or this afternoon, and we're going to now build up upon that in a little bit. We do have a polling question. Before we get to that, I want to ask a few questions on terminology. And many of you said that you experienced both in that one of the first polling questions that you had, both difficulties with interest and difficulties with arousal. And if someone would like to share what's the difference between those two, how do you conceptualize those differently? If you're interested in sharing, just raise your hand and we'll come to you with the microphone. If you can just state your name and if you had any of those disclosures to make.
I'm Sue Goldstein. I paid for my own travel. And what else was I supposed to disclose?
If you are affiliated with any organization that has an interest.
Okay. Well, I'm here as a patient, but I'm also here as a sexuality educator and author, and I've interviewed a lot of patients, and I'm a clinical researcher, so I have talked to a lot of patients, and I'm also on the board of the International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health. I think as a patient, differentiating between desire and arousal, if you're interested in having sex or if you're receptive to your partner approaching you, that's desire. When you're getting wet, when you're getting tingly, when you're having those bodily changes in bed or as you're approaching the bed, I think that it's the wetness that's the arousal. So while you have the interest and your body may be starting to, get turned on, that's desire, but once you start getting your body actually changing, it's the getting wet, it's the maybe it's your nipples getting erect, your clitoris getting enlarged. Those bodily changes are the arousal. So I think that one of the biggest problems is you may not have an arousal issue, but if you have no desire, your body isn't going to be aroused until perhaps your partner starts stimulating you, and then you have bodily arousal, and then maybe you may have more interest. But the arousal can't just occur, standing there looking at your hot husband. Or maybe you don't have a hot husband. I'm married 40 years and I still think my husband's hot. But, they're two separate things. But there is an interplay. But that doesn't mean that they're the same thing.
We'll be exploring that, I think, throughout our conversation. How many of you did Sue's comment resonate with that's how you conceptualize it as well? Okay. Any completely different conceptualizations? Do you want it? Okay, right here.
I think that it's enormously diverse. I don't think that, all the words sounded good, but I think if we sat down, had a more personal conversation, differences would emerge.
Of course. And I think we should take this point to heart for all of the, what was your name? Leonore. We should take Leonore's point to heart for all of our discussion about just how variable and personal these will be to everyone. So A show of hands, if you could, there were a couple panelists, or maybe all of you, who indicated that you used to have one kind of normal regarding your sexual experiences, and now you face a distinctly different normal from, your experiences had changed. How many of you, if you feel comfortable raising your hand, experience that same thing where you had one type of sexual experience and normal about that, and now it's completely different? Okay. Are there any show of hands where this has been your normal for as long as you can remember, that for your sort of adult life, you've always been living with this normal? Okay. So most of you, this has sort of had an onset, but we do have a couple of you who have been dealing with this most of your lives. That's helpful to set the context. I'd like to go to a polling question now. And these are just, again, to start a discussion. But we'd like to know, for those of you who experience absence or reduced sexual interest, which of the following effects do you consider to have the most significant impact on your daily life? And you can choose two. It's just a discussion starter, including other, if there's something other. So A, no or reduced interest in sexual activity. B, no or reduced sexual or erotic thoughts or fantasies. C, no or reduced initiation of sexual activity. D, not being responsive to my partner's attempt to initiate sexual activity, or again, other. Pick two that are the most important to you. And on the web, we encourage you to answer the same question. Okay, well, you've made my job difficult. We're going to be exploring a lot of these issues. About equal numbers of A, C, and D, with less for erotic or sexual thoughts or fantasies. Okay, so let's explore a few of these in a little bit more detail. And I'm going to start with the response to your partner's initiation, which is D here. Any of you, you didn't just have to pick the polling choice for this. Any of you can please comment on this. Are your sexual activities, this is maybe an easy question, are your sexual activities typically initiated by you, your partner, or both? You, your partner. Both. Okay. So it appears that the role of your partner's initiation is very important to your sexual experience. How do you conceptualize when we talked about responsiveness to that initiation? When you saw this question, what was going through your minds when you said about being responsive? What happens? Can anyone describe anything that happens to you physically or mentally when your partner is initiating?
I'm Carla Price. The biggest thing that I feel is anxiety, because I know that I'm not going to be able to respond back. So, I just tense up, I'm anxious, and like one of the speakers said, I definitely try to avoid it at all costs. So I'll stay up late, I get up early, avoid any alone time. And my children are married and out of the house, so I don't have a lot of stresses other than this, and it really shows.
Thank you, Carla. Would anyone else like to comment? We had one over here. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, there in the back.
I'll say, hey, let me just finish doing the dishes or close my computer and make some space for this.
And what's going through your head, if I can ask? And what's your name?
It hadn't occurred to me, but it occurs to him. So, okay, I'm open to that.
Okay. Would anyone else like to share any kind of physical or mental responses? Yes, Beverly.
It's interesting because what goes through my head is, am I going to be able to orgasm during this? And is that going to impact how he feels about our relationship? Because honestly, that's a huge part of men's self-worth if they can get you there. And I've seen the wheels almost come off of my relationship a number of times when that piece is lacking. So if I know my treatment's wearing off, I tend to avoid sex because I know that that's going to create an issue.
Thank you. Let's talk about your own initiation. If it happens that you initiate sex, is your experience differ at those times than if your partner has initiated sexual experience? Physically, mentally, or emotionally? Is it a different experience? Is it the same experience? Show of hands, is it the same experience? Sure. Okay, go ahead.
I would say it's a vastly different experience. If you're feeling aroused and you're feeling interested and you want to initiate sex, the likelihood that you're going to have a successful exchange in bed or wherever you decide to have sex is much higher, at least in my world. If I'm thinking about sex, if I'm interested, if I'm aroused, it's going to be a much more fulfilling experience than if I'm going along because I was doing the dishes and I can figure out how to make time for it. Okay. And so that just depends on how you're being impacted by the arousal issue and the interest issue.
Okay. Does Beverly's point resonate with you? Okay. Okay. Anyone want to build upon that? Okay. Okay. Go ahead, yes. Oh, the mic's coming.
I think that Beverly's experience is idiosyncratic to her, not unique, but I think other people expect that when they respond but don't initiate, that there will be longer foreplay, and that's been communicated with their partner. The foreplay will be choreographed to fit the situation.
Thank you. I think there was a couple hands over here.
Hi, I'm Catherine. Whoops. I don't want to say this really because my husband's sitting right next to me, but I can tell you that when he does initiate, my response is kind of, and that's both mentally and physically. My body really doesn't do anything, and nothing happens to me mentally or emotionally either. And I actually don't ever initiate sexual activity since it's happened, so it was kind of hard for me to answer your follow-up question to that.
Is it hard for others to answer the follow-up question, like Catherine said? Go ahead, Victoria.
I have to say I 100% relate to what she just said, and I felt the same way. When you asked that question, I was kind of going, I never initiate, so I don't even know anymore.
What makes the questions that we're asking difficult for you is as much what we want to know as what the actual answer to the question is. So please feel free. If we're asking the questions in the wrong way, you can alter them to fit your experience. So feel free. We had a hand right here in the.
Hi, my name is Carmen, and my trip was funded by Veritas, but like Beverly, I would have flown here without that. I'm really excited that you're doing this. My husband and I have suffered for over 30 years with my low libido, and I did get treatment, which has helped me tremendously. And for the first time in a long, long time, I do initiate sex sometimes. And for my husband, that's a wonderful blessing because he knows that it's not duty sex, but that I actually want him. and he wants me to want him. And I think that most partners feel that way about their sexual relationships. So it does make a big difference that I'm able to do that now. Thank you.
It's Sue again. I think one of the problems, and I know occurs for me, is that even if I'm willing when my husband initiates to have sex, I can't stay in the moment necessarily, and then your body stops responding. And even going into the bedroom is like, am I going to stay focused today? Am I going to have an orgasm today? And it's like, you feel sometimes like, why waste your time having sex if nothing's going to happen? But say, okay, I'll try. I'm willing to try again. I love my husband. Essentially, it starts out being duty sex, and if you're lucky, it turns into great sex. I'm in my 60s, and sometimes sex is the best it's ever been in my life because, like some of these other women, my children are grown, so I don't have those kinds of stressors. But sometimes my body just betrays me, and it doesn't respond, or it responds. But then if I can't stay in the moment, and I've taught myself to refocus back, sort of my own version of mindfulness, but it doesn't always work. And that's a really hard issue to deal with. And there are times that, like Beverly, when I have a testosterone pellet, and when it's fresher and newer, my body, I'm more interested. And when it's getting later, my husband can also tell. He goes, go get your blood tests. It's probably time for a new pellet. And we never know when we can count on our minds and our bodies.
Thank you, Sue. One more right here, and then, we'll do two more. One more right here, and then one more in the back.
Hi, I'm Amanda, and likewise, I signed up to be part of this discussion before I found out that my travel could be funded by Veritas. But in response to the question, I agree with what everybody said. Obligatory sex is a far cry from initiating, and I think for years the burden of a healthy or a regular sexual relationship has fallen on the men, particularly my husband. And I think they've sort of gotten the bum rap, and women have too, but unfortunately in the lack of desire, that's what it falls down to. So in the short amount of time that I was treated, it made a dramatic difference for us as far as my initiating, and I can tell that it definitely elevated our whole level of intimacy and the way we related to each other. Once I stopped, it returned to normal, and unfortunately the burden falls on his shoes. But I think it would be interesting one day if you guys could pull some men and get their thoughts on the process.
All right, thank you. Okay, one more back there.
Hi, my name is Fsiad. I have no funding to be here. I know for myself and many of my friends growing up, we sort of learned not to initiate sex because some of our boyfriends made fun of us, or I know there's a stereotype that men are always wanting sex, but that wasn't always my experience. And also it took us longer to orgasm, and we found that embarrassing and wondered if we were normal, because in porn, in culture, in Hollywood movies, it seemed very easy for women. So there was a lot of shame around that.
Thank you very much. Leah, right? Thank you. Let's move on to the next question that focuses on arousal. So for those of you who experience absent or reduced sexual arousal, which of the following effects do you consider to have the most significant impact on your daily life? And here again, you can choose up to 2. No or reduced sexual excitement, pleasure during sexual activity. No or reduced sexual arousal in response to written, verbal, or visual cues. No or reduced genital or non-genital sensation during sexual activity, or other. Okay, so the top 2 in terms of frequency here, no or reduced sexual excitement or pleasure, or no or reduced genital or non-genital sensation during sexual activity. On the web, can we get a sense of what the responses were?
Sure. 50% of the people on the web said no or reduced sexual excitement or pleasure during sexual activity. 40% said no or reduced sexual arousal in response to written, verbal, or visual cues, followed by 30% with no or reduced genital or non-genital sensation, and then 10% said other.
Okay. If you're on the web, it sounds like a few more of you talked about arousal in response to written, verbal, or visual cues. Type in a comment to that. So Jenny, on the web, did I ask about what the responses, did they look similar to that first question I asked?
Yes, very much so.
Very similar, okay. So let's go into a little bit of these issues in a little bit more depth. How do you differentiate between the terms excitement, pleasure, sensation, arousal? Do you tend to use, do they mean very similar things for you? Do you prefer one term? Does one term, arousal or excitement, or a different term resonate for you? We'll go with Karen first.
I forgot to disclose that I have not received any remuneration of any type to be here. I think, in my opinion, that question is incredibly varied, and everyone is going to be using a different word to describe what is either psychological or physical excitement around. I mean, pick A, B, C, or D.
And can I follow up? Does it make it difficult to answer these questions and identify which one of these would be most important to you, given that they all use different terms? So following up on what Karen said, I see some head nodding. So, okay. So if I ask about the sexual excitement and pleasure during sexual activity, would someone be brave enough to explain what are you conceptualizing when you did respond to that one? Is it the sensations? Does it include orgasm? I know this is very tough subject to address, and so we do appreciate all of your thoughts and experiences. Okay. Well, if you do want to comment on that and work it in somehow, feel free. Because we do know it is difficult, as Karen was saying. Sure. Go ahead.
I'm Luann, and I'm a patient, and I'm also a therapist. My travel was paid for by Veritas. The way I look at it is that, from a therapist's mindset, sexual excitement is what you make out of what your body is feeling, but sensation is what you actually believe you are feeling, and it's the transmission of the nervous impulses that you go, oh, I feel that. It's muted. It's less than I felt before, but I feel that. And then I think A is what you make of what you're feeling and how pleasurable you categorize it to be for yourself.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment? Yeah, right here.
So my name is Dr. Sharon Parrish. I'm president of the International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health, and my travel was supported by Sprout. I think looking at these, the distribution of responses here, I think it's very important to understand the age range of the women both in the teleconference and also in the room. And C is going to be very different in a younger versus an older woman. And I think this differentiation and understanding these responses is very critical to understanding the display of this diagnosis in patients here and in our offices.
Do the FDA colleagues want to follow up on any aspects of what we've been talking about, interest or arousal? Yes, Christy.
I have a question on response B, actually. So even though it didn't get as many votes as either A or C, I'm just wondering if any of the ladies could clarify for us what kind of written cues, verbal cues, visual cues, or even tactile cues may help in helping to reduce the difficulty with arousal.
Okay, we'll go with Karen.
Well, as a sexuality educator, I am very interested in finding ways to become the best lover you can become. And for some people, that is looking at erotica. For some people, in response to your question, that is using sex toys of all kinds, either alone or with your partner. It's so, again, varied in the ways that you can, besides just being anxious about it, that you can learn to be a good lover and to accept the limits of what you are able to achieve or accomplish without feeling like a failure.
Does anyone else have another follow-up? We have one here.
Hi, my name is Natalie. I had received a travel stipend to be here today as well from Veritas
Can you talk a little
Solutions.
closer to the mic? Thank you.
I have a thought about arousal and desire that occurs to me. I used to have a normal sex life my whole life, and then this happened. It was a year of going through hell, but I'm now being successfully treated. And so the question about desire is basically before, it's not a matter of how much foreplay we do or not. I'll be approached and we can spend forever trying to make something happen. And the difference is the desire within me. Like it's very obvious for men when it's working and not because they're able to have sex. I'm able to grit through it, which I often do in terms of like, I do it for him, but not for me. So the loss of the desire is what I think it's important to make that distinction. It used to be there, it's not anymore, unless I keep getting treated every 4 to 6 months.
Thank you very much. Yes. Yes, see you.
If it's okay, can I probe one of the responses?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
I can't see the woman who's the head of the society. There you are. Can you say a little bit, can you expand a little bit on the comment that you made about, some of the differences that you might expect with or expectations for some of these responses based on an age range? Can you comment on that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So I was referring to item C, no or reduced genital or non-genital sensation during sexual activity. Both organic diseases that are sometimes comorbid with older women, such as diabetes, hypertension, and other neurologic conditions, or genital symptoms of menopause related to vulvar and vestibular changes, may result in changes in genital or non-genital sensation during sexual activity. So I think looking at the spectrum of responses has to be in the context of understanding we have a distribution of ages of women in the room, and it might be useful to separate that out.
Yes, Marcia.
I have a question, and Sarah actually asked it, and I think it's important as we move forward. The question was, when we think about excitement and pleasure and arousal, does that include orgasm? And so we can maybe just do a show of hands.
Sure. So if in those set of terms you would include orgasm, could you please raise your hand if you feel comfortable? Okay. If that term doesn't need to be there, is not included in that, the rest, I'll assume the rest of you. Or raise your hand. Okay. It does not need to be. It is not a part of that. Okay. It can be, but doesn't have to be. Raise your hand, please. Okay. It seems like the majority. Thanks for clarifying. Can we? I wonder if we can go back to this question here about the age range. Can I ask? Let's see how many people who indicated C about the sensation. I have to do some math here. How many of you are 40 and less? Okay. Let's take 51 and older. How many of you answered C? Okay. And younger than 51. Okay. So we obviously don't have exactly the spread, but it does say that there is a difference. Yeah, at the break, we'll try to see what the clicker responses were and go back. We might mess up some technology here. Kind of one direction. Yeah, you want to...
Hello, my name is Melanie Majoris. I'm a physician and a sex therapist in Northern Virginia. I have no financial interests to disclose. And I think this is a very interesting question. Every woman conceptualizes it a little bit differently. From my patients, sexual excitement is often akin to the building of an orgasm, but not necessarily the actual orgasm. Sexual pleasure is usually included in that building, but of course the pinnacle is the orgasm and the climax that most men and women are looking for. The sexual arousal in response to written, verbal, and visual cues can be in a solo setting or in a couple setting. And that is different because if a woman hears, and I've heard this from my patients, if a woman hears her husband say something sexy or naughty or in her ear, that may turn her on. That may result in arousal instantly or not instantly, and that may change, and that may cause distress. So these answers are very heavy. They're very dense, and teasing it out even more, I think, would be helpful because every woman experiences it a little bit differently, and every woman and couple conceptualizes it differently.
Okay, we can take a couple more, and then we'll move on. But while we're getting the mics over there, I'll encourage everyone, I think my colleagues would agree, to write about this in the docket. If you're write about how you make those distinctions, and you can really expand upon it there. That'd be very helpful. Okay, we'll take one more, and then we'll move on to other symptoms.
When you asked the question about do we include orgasm in the concept of sexual pleasure, I think you got few answers because we were confused by the question a little bit. And then someone added in, well, it doesn't have to always happen, it can be included. And I think that's a very dense question that needs to be teased out too, because it winds up that if a woman's never had an orgasm, it's a bit like going to a movie and always leaving 10 minutes before the movie ends, and after a while you stop wanting to go to the movies. And so for some people who know that orgasm is an option, and it's an option that they can have relatively easily, then it's not as crucial of a factor. But when it's never a factor, then it's a very crucial one. And so I think we kind of blended all of that together when we were raising our hands about that.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Let's move on to other symptoms that are beyond arousal and interest. And then we're going to be following up on sort of the sexual event. So we're going to be coming back to that. There were some others in both of these categories. Actually, I'm going to give a shout out to the folks on the web. Before we get into other symptoms, is there a brief summary we can have of comments on interest or arousal from the web?
We haven't heard too much on the symptoms. We've heard more impacts coming through.
Okay, then we'll wait for impacts at the end.
Sure.
Okay. Now let's talk about other symptoms. What was included in your other? Anyone willing to share that? Okay. Just so we can tease out some of the other aspects of FSD that you might have. Can I have a show of hands again for how many experience something other than? You have interest in arousal challenges, but you also have one of the other aspects of FSD, pain or orgasm or headaches or something else. Would you like to expand upon yours a little bit, Carla?
I'm Carla Price, and I failed to mention that I am funded through Veritas, but I would have come otherwise. My problem is coital headaches. So as my arousal builds, oftentimes I experience just an unbelievable migraine that is worse than any migraine I've ever experienced. So it doesn't happen all the time, but more often than not. So some of my low libido might just be the fact that there's pain waiting at the end. So it's painful pleasure, I guess you might say. So it's not real fun.
And Carla, if I might follow up a little bit then. If your headaches if there's ever a time when your headaches do not accompany your sexual experience, is your interest in arousal still affected? Does it return?
No, I actually have to say that I still have a decrease in arousal. The one thing that I have been treated a little bit, and it's helped about 50%, but again, the arousal, the desire seems to be an issue, which I do want to add. I like this comment that I would love to look at the husbands and the partners' views. It's come to the point where my husband doesn't even want to initiate sex because he's afraid that he'll hurt me because of my headaches. So he said, what fun is it for me to cause you such pain? And so our marriage and relationship's been really rocky. And it's affected his self-esteem and his manhood. So it's definitely a domino effect.
Thank you, Carla. So I think we have another opportunity for the docket comments, which is to ask your husbands to submit, your partners to submit a comment, invite them to. We would like to hear from men as well on their perspectives on this. Would anyone else like to talk about any other symptoms, particularly as they relate to or how they affect interest in arousal? Okay, we have Beverly, and then we'll go back there.
I just want to say that I don't know that these are all physical things, and so if I'm reading the question, the most significant impact on your daily life, and I covered that a little bit when I was speaking, because I think there's a whole myriad of other things that it affects. Most often it affects things like my self-confidence and how I approach the world and how I feel about myself and what I project to other people. So I don't know if anybody's thinking about that, because the multiple choice answers that you offered were really so specific to being aroused or to being interested or actual intercourse. And I think that other category can take into account a whole lot of other things that I'm sure a lot of women in this room experience, but we're so focused on how it actually works with the actual sex act that they're not bringing in this whole other area.
Okay. So maybe I'll go a little bit astray in this and say, if you knew that anxiety could have been one of your choices, how many of you would have put anxiety as it was described? Someone described anxiety here. How many of you would have put that in your top two? Okay, several. And we did hear about it earlier. Is your experience the same as what we heard about, which is a physical anxiety that happens when you think about desire or when you think about arousal or when initiation happens?
The problem with that too is when you take that to any physician and you tell them you have anxiety or you're depressed about it, they give you an antidepressant, which then inhibits your desire and inhibits your ability to orgasm. And so it ends up becoming a circle.
Okay. Great. I do want to go back. There was a comment back there.
Hi, my name is Judy, and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada paid for my trip. I'm here as a researcher. But my research is on language in particular, and in particular language relating to health medical conditions, and this one in particular, which I've studied for a while. I find it interesting how central the language of symptoms is, and it's a word that you keep using. And I think that the idea that these are symptoms suggests that there is an underlying disease, and that's kind of the position that we're starting from, even though we're talking about variety and experience, and the DSM criteria are kind of more open than that, in fact. And so I wonder what would happen if we stopped using the language of symptoms to talk about everything that we're experiencing.
Would it be better for the purposes of discussion if we use the term aspects? That should cover everything. So I'll try to use that term moving forward. Can't promise it, but if I think of it, I'll try to use that term. It sounds like that is a more appropriate term. Are there any other aspects of interest and arousal that FDA wants to follow up on? Yes.
I had one question. I think it's come out from a few people that treatments can kind of make some of the arousal and desire wax and wane. But I was wondering, for those of you maybe who aren't on treatment, or even those on treatment who could separate it, I'm just trying to get a sense of what arousal and desire is doing in general. Is there a waxing and waning over time, or do you feel it's kind of a steady state of where you are all the time with this condition?
I'll go with Vicki first.
I had treatment when I first went to see Dr. Goldstein. I got the testosterone pellet, and it did work, like some of these women are saying, for a short period of time. But it wasn't in my budget to keep going back and flying back to see him, and it wasn't offered where I live. So I am currently not on any treatment. And when I was on the treatment, it helped a little bit. Now I'm just back where I started, and my symptoms are pretty constant, and they don't wax and wane. It's the same every day.
Can I get a show of hands for how many people share the same experience as Victoria? Okay. We'll let Karen, did you want to follow up on that?
Well, I guess it's again in my role as a sexuality educator that the way that can be dealt with these things is to enlarge your perspective beyond the, as I call it in my classes, the stairway to heaven, which is a lockstep way of going and getting to the ultimate orgasm. And there are, from personal experience, a lot of outer course sensuality-based communications and experiences with your partner that can reduce the anxiety and the pressure of having to go all the way to the top.
Okay, thank you. We'll be revisiting this in more depth in the next discussion about treatments in general. Okay, we're good. Okay. Okay. I want to tee up the phone to see if there's anyone in particular on the phone who, absent treatment, you experience waxing and waning of symptoms. That would be useful to hear about. Did anyone, we asked about absent sort of treatment, no waxing and waning of symptoms, sort of constant symptoms. Is there anyone who does experience a waxing and waning of aspects of their condition over time? Okay, in the back there. Okay, the microphone's coming.
Sorry, I think that it's fair to say that desire waxes and wanes as a normal state of human physiology and being. I'm also a sex researcher, and that's what all of the evidence points to.
Does anyone have an experience that they can use to illustrate that?
I think one of the confounding factors of that question is a lot of us are on therapies that are not constant. If you're taking a daily testosterone gel, for instance, it's relatively constant, whereas if you're using a pellet, it forces the waxing and waning. But I think in addition that for some of us who are older, things change as well. I know I interviewed a lot of women for a book I wrote, and one of the women said it was like the light switch turned off. She just lost all interest, all desire, and it didn't change. Whereas for me, it was something that happened slowly over time. And then for me, with time for treatment, I was better. And now, as I'm getting older, I've been on treatment for 13 years. I was diagnosed 13 years ago. And now I find that testosterone alone isn't enough. I have changed, but it's not a daily waxing and waning per se, but it's a slow change. So I think we really have two kinds of patients: those who just one day everything changed. I mean, I think Vicki said it, after her fourth child, everything just totally changed. Whereas for some of us, it's a slower progression.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Go ahead, right there.
Well, with all due respect to the normalcy of desire, I'm Cheryl Kingsburg. I'm a psychologist and professor in reproductive biology at Case Western Reserve. I think the premise of this whole meeting is about an unmet medical need, and that we've all agreed that this is a condition that we're working to find treatments for. So I think symptom is appropriate, and I think it does a disservice to the women who have come all this way to talk about their condition and their symptoms, to be respectful of that this is really very distressing.
Right here. Yeah, if you could state your name and indicate, there was a hand right here. And make your disclosure, please.
Yes, thank you. My name is Ben, and I'm here with my wife. Veritas did pay for our travel, but this is an issue that's very important to us. A couple of people have mentioned the impact on the man in the relationship, and I can speak from personal experience. And it does have a huge impact when your lover, your soulmate, is no longer interested in having sex with you. We've experienced the waxing and waning, but it definitely affects the man. Again, I know it's primarily about the woman, but it affects the man. It certainly affects your ego, how you feel about yourself, and it affects the broader relationship. So it has broader implications than just the man and the woman. It actually affects the relationship and the entire family.
Thank you. All right, I have a question about symptoms or aspects and their changing over time. We heard mention, I don't know, I can't remember if I don't believe any of you mentioned this, but in the comments that were sent to us, a few people mentioned keeping a log in a diary, a daily diary every day. Does anyone take a diary of their condition? Right here? Yes. Can you explain what you put in your diary?
I'm sorry, I'm Judith Reed Hoff, and Veritas handled our travel arrangements. Thank you very much. I use a topical estrogel and Testim, and so that I record every day what the volume is that I administer to myself, and then when it gets, I feel out of whack, then usually I know it's time to have my blood test done, because Dr. Goldstein is very emphatic about following up anywhere. I started off at 3 to 4 weeks, and now it's 6 to 8 weeks.
So if you were asked to think about tracking your symptoms over time, does anyone track those over time, just as a natural thing that you do? Pardon? Someone did? Oh, you track symptoms too?
Yes, I do. I track symptoms because I think it's important that I know, because sometimes, we think we're feeling okay, but if you write it down, it makes a lot more sense, and you can look back and say, okay, this was not a good day or a good evening, and then I'm able to know what to do from then on.
Was there? Yes, Carol.
When I was being treated at the beginning of this experiment, I kept a diary religiously, and I did symptoms every day. And the reason I did that was when I went to see my physician, we would look for patterns that the symptoms are a lot of times related to the amount, the dosage of medication that you're on. And when you're not on enough, you're going to become symptomatic. And when you increase it a little bit, it resolves the problem until you get to the next hurdle. So it was very useful for both me and the doctor that treated me.
Okay. So I think what we're hearing is that the tracking of symptoms over time is in large part due to finding the right treatment or dose for you. But I imagine the same sort of aspects apply to the question that I'm going to ask. So I'm going to ask first, I'm going to ask this question. Knowing that you would want to track your symptoms as accurately as possible, how often do you think you would need to report in order to remember those symptoms accurately? Okay. We have very clearly made it clear that this is dependent on if you're on a treatment. But I'm going to ask you to, when you answer the question, just say whether you're on a treatment or not, and answer the question, anyone to answer the question about what time period do you need? Do you need to record them daily, weekly, monthly, etc.? Okay? So we have one hand here, and then we'll go on to others.
I'm not currently on a treatment. And I myself at times did keep track of symptoms, but what I found, unfortunately, is daily was not important because to me, as time went on, it was the broader picture and the longer range, and it actually became more depressing and distressing to think about on a daily basis. It sort of became the new norm, which really was not acceptable. So my goal was, the long-term effect and how that was affecting me. So conversely, you have one really good sexual experience when I was being treated. You don't also need to record that because you don't forget that. And especially in as few and far between as those occurrences were, that was more critical and more important that I track than a daily occurrence because to me it became the new norm.
Okay. How many people does it resonate for what Amanda said? Okay. Any different experiences? We have a hand here in the back.
We're talking about treatment, and we've only been talking about certain kinds of medical treatments. So let me just say that non-medical interventions, psychotherapeutic interventions, psychoeducational interventions, these also involve a certain amount of paying attention to what's going on in the relationship and paying attention to what's going on in one's moods and in one's body. But it's done in a completely different way because attentional focus is really reframed in some sex therapy that I do, as a problem, so that you don't want to get obsessionally preoccupied with self-monitoring. So I'm finding this conversation a little difficult if we could talk specifically about medical interventions and how you deal with reduced arousal and paying attention and this and that, but it's done quite differently with psychotherapeutic interventions, even though one could pay attention to symptoms or aspects, but one tries to get away from obsessional self-focus as a magnifying problem rather than a useful intervention.
Okay. I think there was another hand up, and then maybe I'll turn and see if there's any follow-up questions to that. Thank you very much.
I actually had never even thought of the idea of keeping a diary or a log of my symptoms because, as someone mentioned on the other side of the room, I was one of the people that had the switch flip in my head, and I had it one day and the next day I didn't. And when I just realized my feelings were kind of always that way, I felt no need to write it down because they're the same every single day. There's nothing dynamic, there's no waxing or waning with me, and I'm not on any treatment, so.
Okay, thank you very much, Catherine. Are there any follow-up questions?
We have one question from Maria.
Oh, okay, let's go to the phone. Yes, operator. Yes, Maria, hi.
Hey, how are you?
Very good, thanks.
Good. I have a question in reference to the treatment from a physician standpoint. Me personally suffering with this for the last 15 years. It's very, I think you go to your doctor and it's more treated about, oh, you're very stressed, you're pregnancy, or you're stressed because you're too long.
Maria, can I interrupt you for a second? Can you hold the phone further away? Let's see if we can fix the sound quality.
Okay, one moment. Is that better?
That's better, yes. Yep, if you could just briefly recap what you're saying.
Okay, one moment. I will take it. Okay, can you hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay, great. I was saying that when I was treated, I just recently had biopsy, which are the pellets done. And I had to actually change physicians because my OB gynecologist, doctor who I've been going to for the last 15 years, did not agree with the actual treatment due to the information that has been submitted to them over the years in terms of the dangers and why women don't need testosterone and all of the information that comes across. I think that our practitioners are well informed. I go to my practitioners with information. I'm just like looking over the internet. How can I fix my problem? I'm like, when is Lepidro coming out? Why can't Livasterine? Why can't those drugs be approved? What's the issue? I mean, my depression.
Hey, Maria, I'm going to interrupt you at this point because we're going to be talking about those issues in our afternoon discussion. Did you have anything that you would like to contribute about the symptoms you feel, particularly as they've changed over time?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
My vaginal dryness it's there. I didn't used to have that issue at all. In terms of anxiety building up with the thought of sex, that has increased immensely, which is a deterrent for me having sex and a deterrent for my husband pursuing sex.
Okay. Thank you very much. Do we have one more person on the phone? No, we don't. Okay. We have a few more minutes, and let's first see if there's any web comments that have come in, particularly on the ideas that we've been talking about, changes or not changing over time.
So we have heard a few symptoms mentioned, disinterest, repulsion, intense pain that has brought tears. And then in terms of changing over time, one participant commented that for her that the challenges were in the beginning of her sexual experience, and then sometimes the challenge would be reaching an orgasm, so that it varies throughout the experience. And then other factors, we heard a few factors on feeling guilty and feeling as though their partner felt as a failure that they couldn't please satisfy.
Thank you. I want to ask a few questions about engaging in sexual activity. We've talked about that some, but I have a few directed questions about that. So if you were asked to rate whether your last sexual event was satisfactory or not satisfactory, what would go into this determination? I realize this is a very hard question, so you can change the question if you need to, but what we want to know is what goes into a determination of whether a particular sexual event, however you've determined that you've had sex of some sort, how do you determine whether that's satisfactory or not to you? What factors into that? Okay, Karen, please.
Well, it depends on what your expectations are for the outcome.
So your expectations, show of hands, if your expectations now on what you would consider a satisfactory sexual event has changed than when before this happened? Show of hands? Okay. So within this new set of expectations, is it easy to tell whether a sexual event was satisfactory or not? Catherine, I don't want to pick on you, but I see you might have something to say.
It's a success if he's having a good time, because it's out of obligation for me, and I have no expectations. I might not even want to have sex, but if he wants sex, then and I give it to him, then yes, I was a good wife today, you know.
Does that resonate with others? We have one comment here, and then we'll go to the back.
As a sex therapist, I deal with the idea of satisfaction a lot, and satisfactory sex. I would say that the majority of my patients, that is not the goal. They are not looking for satisfactory sex. But if you ask them specifically what it is that they would find satisfactory, sometimes you get incredibly sad answers, like a woman who says she doesn't want to cry after sex. A man who says, I just want to feel desired. And so looking for satisfactory sexual experience, I think it's not the goal of the average adult, and I don't know that it should necessarily be the goal that we're looking for either. Probably satisfying, not satisfactory, but satisfying sex and good sex, and where emotions are pleasant afterwards would be a better goal, at least for the patients that I see.
As a follow-up, I'm going to ask a show of hands to follow up on this. Show of hands if achieving a satisfactory sexual event is a meaningful aspect of your overall condition. Okay, so it looks like several of you, that is true. There was a couple hands raised over here. Okay.
I'm Lori Watson, and I'm a sex therapist. I paid for my own travel. I think that when women tell me, I've treated at this point hundreds and probably thousands of women with low sexual desire, and when they talk about what's satisfying, it isn't just necessarily an orgasm, although I think that is hard to understand if the goal is orgasm for perhaps a male partner. They'll say, yes, I got aroused, I reached an orgasm, but what's missing for them, and I'd like to split it apart again, desire and arousal, what's missing is they didn't necessarily want it. They didn't desire it in the first place. And that subjective sense of desire is often very missing and feels, difficult for them. Thank you.
One more over there.
My name is Kelly, and I paid for my own travel. I agree with the two ladies here. It's there's no wanting to have sex. And it's very difficult when you do have it. It's out of obligation whether you want to admit to it or not, and as difficult that is. And I would say something that would end up being pleasurable would be the fact that when it ends, your husband doesn't automatically think it was out of obligation. And it's difficult, as the gentleman said, it's difficult for everybody. It doesn't just affect the female, it affects the male and their mental state, which affects your relationship, which affects how you deal with your kids, and it affects how you deal with everybody else and how you think of yourself. It is a encompassing thing, and to have to try to write it down every day is discouraging and depressing. So I know that kind of answered a bunch of different questions, but
Karen, and then we'll go to Amanda, and then I have one wrap-up question.
Are any of you aware of the faked orgasm?
I'll take that was a rhetorical question.
Well, the laughter in the room sort of indicates that it is a phenomenon for all women to want to please their partner or think that their partner wants them to have this orgasmic nirvana kind of feeling. And it makes me wonder how many partners have actually talked to each other, either at the beginning of a relationship or during their relationship, about what pleasure they would like to have and how they can give it to each other. And for some people, outer course is much more pleasurable than intercourse. And the discussion here has been focusing on intercourse and orgasm. But how do you know what really pleases your partner most? It may not be that cultural stereotype, again, as I've been commenting on, that orgasm is not the necessary goal for all people.
So I will just reiterate that the docket it would be a great place we would like to hear across the spectrum about what your goals are in your sexuality, your sexual experience. So I'll encourage you to contribute a docket comment and include that. We'll go to Amanda, and then I have one question to wrap up.
Sorry. I agree with what Karen was saying in that for me, sex is not just about orgasm. I mean, a successful or satisfying event for me is more about feeling connected to Ben and being close and feeling arousal. But it's also the desire component of it is that, I can have sex. It's not an issue of being able to have sex because I can perform at any time. The difference in desire is that comes from within, and that makes me feel alive and like a woman and desirable and feminine, and that's the aspect that I think I bring to Ben when I'm feeling that, which is not very often. And so I think that's the difference between a satisfying sexual event that has desire accompanied with it, because I feel like I'm contributing.
Great. I see some heads nodding. We'll go to the web. Are there any final comments, particularly ones that haven't touched upon something addressed yet?
We did hear a few participants comment on factors that they felt have led to their FSD, including age, body image, boredom. And then another participant commented on having more research on attitudes on sexual behavior, specifically for residents in nursing or non-nursing home settings. And finally, we had one participant commented that she has to pretend to enjoy it for her husband.
Thank you. It is very clear that coming up with questions to appropriately ask on this such a challenging and personal and variable condition is difficult. So I'm going to put a thing out for the docket too. If you are writing in a docket comment and you're like, oh, I wish this question would have been asked, or this is how you would have gotten really good thoughts about what's most significant to women's lives, here's a question I'd ask. That would be very helpful. I think it would help FDA as we think about moving forward and asking women questions about this very personal, tough subject. So with that, I'm going to say that we're finished with topic 1 on the most significant symptoms. We're going to be rolling into topic 2. Let's come back at 2:35. But before I just want can everyone in the audience give a round of applause to all of the women and men who have shared their experiences. Thank you so much. We'll be back at 2:35.